All right, this is Sarah Carlson from Practical Farmers of Iowa. I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. We just have a few housekeeping things as we get started. So thanks for joining. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer organization here in Iowa. We have 2,500 members. And about 7 years ago or so, we had a large group in our membership who wanted to know more about cover crops and also wanted to start working more with their pilots to do aerial seeding of cover crops. So we started working a lot with different pilots around the state, and then we also started networking with other farmers and pilots in other states to learn what they were doing. So we've been sort of learning more about how to have successful cover crop establishment overseeded with pilots and with other types of equipment. And the National Agricultural Aviation Association reached out to us to hold this webinar. So we're really excited to have this unique webinar. And today on the program, we're going to have Andrew Moore, the president of the National Agricultural Aviation, give an overview of the potential for cover crops and how to add, what that potential could be for adding to your business. And then Jamie Scott, a farmer in Indiana who works with pilots and actively also does cover crops on his farm, is going to sort of bring you all up to speed on what's this cover crop craze all about and what are some rules of thumb and some tips for success that you could all maybe implement in your businesses. And then Brian Burst, who's with Klinkenborg Aerial Seeding and Spraying out of Parkersburg, Iowa, are going to present. He's going to present about things that he's learned in the last 3 or 4 years using cover crops in their business. And then towards the end, if we have enough time, I will show you a Selector tool that folks might want to know about as you start working with farmers who want to add cover crops. So just a few final housekeeping things. You'll notice the chat box is down in the bottom left-hand corner. You could enter your name, email address, and business and town and state, so just so we know where folks are from. And then as we go, we really encourage you to offer and ask questions and statements and put things into that chat box. And if presenters want to address a question immediately, that's fine, or if we want to save them towards the end, that's fine also. This webinar will be archived. So later on, NAA staff will be sending out a notice on the link so that if you want to share this link with other pilots who might want to know more, you can. And so we really just thank the group that's presenting today, because I think this is going to be a really successful webinar. We see 41 folks already on. I have 2 polls that I put out earlier, and I might dump those in a little bit later. Just to get some questions answered on who's been using cover crops and whatnot. So hopefully everyone can hear me. If you have any tech issues, please send a chat. Otherwise, Andrew Moore, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Well, hello. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone again to NAAA and Practical Farmers of Iowa's webinar on successfully aerially seeding cover crops. Again, I'm Andrew Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the National Agricultural Aviation Association. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to be with us today at a time of year when aerial applicators, all of you I know are across the country, are extremely busy, but I do think you'll find this hour to be time well spent. Today's webinar is a byproduct of our latest cover story in Agricultural Aviation magazine. So if you haven't had a chance to read the May-June cover story on cover crops, I encourage you to read it to learn more about some of the opportunities and challenges related to aerial cover cropping and how some of your colleagues in the Midwest and elsewhere throughout the country have been able to extend their flying season by adding aerial cover crop seeding to the list of services that they provide to their customers. This is an exciting area of agriculture. There have been a lot of articles about cover crops in agricultural publications, and more farmers are starting to see what's known as the agronomic benefit that can come from incorporating cover crops into their cropping plans. All of this bodes well for us as aerial applicators, but the key, of course, is to provide quality cover crop applications and great service. And of course, cover crops also have several environmental benefits as well. controlling erosion, retaining and recycling soil nutrients, improving soil health, water quality, and moisture availability are just a few of the reasons why farmers and conservationists are turning to cover crops. Proponents of cover crops have set a goal of reaching 20 million acres of cover crops by 2020. So based on present day estimates, cover crop acres may have to increase by as much as 500% to reach that goal. So to do that, aerial applicators are going to have to be a vital part of that equation. There's no method of application that can seed more acres of cover crops within the allowable window to get good establishment more quickly than ag aircraft. Aerial application, as we know, accounts for just under 20% of all applied crop protection products on commercial farms. That translates to the agricultural aviation industry treating 71 million acres of cropland by air each year. And much of those 20 million acres of cover crops that we have targeted by 2020 stand to be additional acres on top of the 71 million acres that we as aerial applicators already service. So there's a lot of acres out there to be gained from flying on cover crops, potentially 20 million acres or more, and that's what today's speakers are here to help you with. So before they begin, I would definitely be remiss if I did not thank Practical Farmers of Iowa and Sarah Carlson specifically for graciously offering to host this webinar for us. They're also going to archive the webinar, as Sarah just said, on their website, so it'll be available on demand, and we'll get that out via our NAAA e-newsletter, probably our Facebook page as well. I also want to thank today's speakers, Brian Burst and Jamie Scott, for sharing their insights and experiences about aerial cover crop seeding. They were also instrumental, as was Sarah, in the Agricultural Aviation Magazine article. So again, on behalf of NAAA, really thank you so much to the three of you. But we're not finished. After today, we'll have a cover crop session for the first time ever at NAAA's convention this December in Louisville, Kentucky. So I hope you all can join us on December 11th in Louisville for that. So thanks again. And now I'd like to turn things back over to you, Sarah, who you can introduce our next speakers.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay. Just give me a second to switch. If folks want to fill out any of those polls, you can if you've been using cover crops, flying them on, and numbers of acres. While we bring up Jamie Scott's presentation, and Jamie, if you want to unmute your mic, and you should be ready to go.
Okay. Basically, we do farm here in Indiana, 2,000 acres, my dad and myself, and have been big promoters of the cover crops. We saw the benefits on our own farm and started a small group several years ago that tried to get others to do it, and looked at all seeding methods. Of course, we have really settled on the airplane as our main method for what we're doing currently. But on the side then, because of starting that group, we've kind of started a seed business. Currently in that group, we're almost 100,000 acres strong. So we do have a lot of research and a lot of trials, some successful and some unsuccessful, to learn from, so that we can move forward and help others out. I always like to tell everyone where we're from. I think that's really important. You know, everything that I'm going to show you may not pertain to other areas. I know I received some pictures this week from southern Indiana, a lot different seeding rates and dates and different results than it is up here in the north. So you keep in mind as I go through here, that red dot is, we're in northern Indiana, about 40 miles south of the Michigan line. So, and of course, like Sarah said, you know, cover crops have been a big thing, and really a lot of farmers are looking to try them, and just several of these things here are the reasons why. Increase in organic matter, recycling those unused nutrients, encourage biological activity, improve water infiltration, And probably the biggest one is they want increased yield, but I always cross that out and say it's increased profit that they're after. And cover crops have been a big part of that to help them with that increased profit. Just one example is 2012, and I mean, we had a drought year here in northern Indiana. Of the side-by-sides that we did, almost 20 bushel yield gain of cover crops. At corn prices that year, more than pays for several years of cover crops. And all of these side-by-sides were cover crops that were flown on with airplane, the only thing different being half the farm had cover crops and the other half didn't. With all those farmers asking questions of how to seed it and all these seeding methods, and we're going to need all of them to get to 20 million acres, it looks to me like 2 shuffle out to the top is really viable options, and that's because in the northern corn belt and as we get northern with colder temperatures, we have to get the cover crop started before the crop comes off, and so the high boy sprayer, the airplane, or possibly interseeding at this time are our best options. And as we look at that, if we wait till after harvest to drill here in northern Indiana, we can get a decent stand on top of the ground. It's going to look decent. I've got a picture here of drilled on and flown. These pictures were taken the same day in December, one about 3 years ago. But what we see is when we dig underground in those same situations, the left there being drilled and the right being flown on, is that early start really gets us more benefits to it. And that's why, of our acres that we're handling, most all of those are getting flown on. Very few are getting drilled. And it's because of this root growth. And if you're going to spend the money for cover crops, we want to get the benefit out of them. I looked at just the temperatures and sun, of those different dates, September 7th being an average fly-on date in our area versus waiting till after crops come off on October 7th. And in that month, I mean, we lose an hour and a half of sunlight and 12 degrees of temperature on average. That's just really critical in starting those cover crops. So that's why the aerial application, the high boy sprayers are going to be the 2 things that really lead to more acres and an area to gain on. Just going to show a few pictures here of some of the stuff we've done. This is annual ryegrass that's flown on. This was taken in 2009, really wet fall. Everyone else was trying to figure out how to seed cover crops. We already had ours on. I saw the same thing last year in Ohio. There were areas that were going to drill cover crops that never got cover crops in. They returned cover crop seed. It is not going to be a consistent business doing that. Where with the airplane or high boy sprayer, more consistency, you can get that seed on guaranteed acres that way. I did throw in there a slide of pure green corn with cover crops growing. There's actually 3 species in here. And wanted to show that timing on corn is not as critical as some of us think. So be careful there. A lot to learn. Make sure we're doing trials on some of that. And then results of it. I've just got a picture of a cornfield and bean field here, which, keep showing everyone that it can be very successful. The rate of seeds per acre of annual ryegrass and the timing is in the bottom right-hand corner on that slide. And then this being soybeans that we're harvesting, that, again, an outstanding stand of cover crops in there, getting them on before we harvest them and getting good growth out of them. But no matter where I talk, I always show the bad pictures with the good, and this can happen. And this is what is a key part of my business and working with my pilots, is handling this end of things. And this is where, when I look to aerial application, the one reason that it has started and then failed in areas is because we don't always service it like we should. This is a field that's not 100% coverage. but yet is a very successful stand of cover crops if someone walks that with the farmer, explains to them what's going on. This could be due to residue from their combine rather than something that a pilot missed a pattern or did something. But unfortunately, the first thing the farmer is going to do is blame the plane for creating this pattern or this problem. So service is very critical in making the aerial application work. And it's something that, we do a lot of. As my pilot's flying fungicide and insecticide and other things on, I can be out there servicing it, lining up acres, taking care of things for him, so that he's not having to have someone do that. Also, a part of that is when lining up acres in the fall. I know when I talk to a lot of pilots around, the problem is they have 20 acres of this product, 40 acres of a different product, and maybe 100 acres of another product. The one thing we do is try to keep 2 or 3 different products that we're going to fly on, and keep it consistent, and then be educated to talk to those customers about why we need to pick one of those 3, not have 100 different mixes to go out there, because we just can't get the acres covered if we're switching and coming back with half loads or something to fly on. The other part of what we do, and this is where, my pilots really thank me, is we're doing a lot of research looking at the different seeds. It takes a lot of time, and it's tough to keep up with all that when I do it all the time. He said, they don't understand the different products, what is even available. So we work really well together with, them flying the plane and doing a great job, and then me doing the end of servicing, selecting seed, and handling all the questions that those customers have. These were just a few of the trials of different things that we had on our farm last year. Some flown on, some drilled, some broadcast. These are things that we can have a meeting and educate those customers and keep them up to date. That the pilot of mine and others that I worked with have really struggled with that end of things. So, it's not that we're just out there flying on seed. I tell people that, as far as putting it on, that's the easiest job. Now we have to figure out how to terminate it, how to use it, because if it's a problem in the spring for the farmer, they're not going to come back and want to use it again. So we have to help them with the questions, help them with the service, and I think that's why here in Northeast Indiana, our operation has been fairly successful, is because Nick's Flying Service has done a good job with flying the plane, keeping the cover crops on the field, off of the neighbors, and then I'm in the background helping do the service and do things to get those acres and to keep them there consistently, the same acres year after year. And with that, I think that's all I had for now, and hopefully be able to take some questions later.
Yeah, while I'm switching to Brian, Jamie, I just have one question. Have you varied your corn or soybean planting populations at all, or have seen any response of different cover crops flown on to a heavier or a lighter seeded corn or soybean stand?
Yeah, we've done a lot with corn and beans both, as far as stand population and as far as row spacings. I'll talk soybeans first because that's the area that we'll normally struggle, and we've done everything from 7.5-inch rows up to 30-inch rows. We've done everything from an early, group 2 maturity up to a late group 4 maturity, and basically there's not a lot of difference between those. It is the weather that makes us successful and not sometimes. As long as we can get rain, we can make it successful, and we've actually done it on irrigated ground where, we can swing the center pivot, and with tall, dense stand of corn, we still can get a successful stand of cover crops in there.
Great. Well, folks, post your questions as you have them. Now we're going to turn it over to Brian Burst from Klinkenborg. So if Jamie and Andrew, could you just make sure your microphones are muted? And Brian, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Like I said, this is Brian of Klinkenborg Aerial in Parkersburg. And we'll start going through. I reiterate what Jamie was saying. A lot of this I'll be able to go through fairly quickly because he's already touched on some of those points. Just a couple of things why we decided to add cover crops into our service is, obviously extends the flying service. We see the demand growing every year. We're getting more and more questions. You're obviously reading any of the agricultural magazines. There's very few nowadays that don't have something to do talking about cover crops. We were already set up with the application equipment because we do quite a bit of work in the south, so it made sense to. And we didn't have a whole lot of investment cost to get involved with it, and we had some of the pilots that were doing quite a bit of dry work already. Some of these pictures are for purposes of talking to growers or groups that might not be familiar with the aircraft, and I think that's kind of important if you're going out and talking to the public. I was surprised at how many people just were interested in, well, how does it come out of there? Or you use the same hopper? What does your equipment look like, so they could picture in their mind how this application was taking place. It seems like the majority out there are airplanes. However, there are the helicopter operations as well. We're using a bucket with one of our helicopters. But I would say there's a variety of ways, and for you helicopter applicators out there already that have been doing this. We've been doing dry work with the bucket, but this will be our first season with the cover crop situation. And the only point I want to put here that when we're testing, pattern testing, what we're seeing is that the pattern seems to work better with a racetrack pattern, more so than the back-to-back, and it seems to me more prevalent with the bucket than it does with the airplane. So just something to maybe take a look at, that if you're doing your pattern testing, try both of those, and if you have a situation where you can run racetrack instead of back-to-back, might put out a little bit different pattern. And what we've patterned with are materials such as the cereal rye, or the which is similar to some of the tebuthyron or urea, as far as our swath widths and that kind of thing. I'll get into that a little bit here in just a little bit. Picture of us northeast Iowa, flying over corn at that black layer time frame. That's when they wanted this flown on. And one of the reasons I'm pointing this out, when we're doing some of the testing, and most of the stuff that I'm going to refer to is putting out a cereal rye mix. That seems to be the mix that works best in our area. I know Jamie does a lot of annual rye in his area. For us, we do some of that, but we seem to have a little bit better results in our area with cereal rye. But the height of the application was working really well around 50 feet. We start getting down too low on that. We started seeing a little bit of pattern differences, and that was with cereal rye. What we do fly a little bit lower when we're doing the annual rye, especially depending on what the wind is doing. Since that annual rye is so much lighter, really got to be careful with when the wind starts getting up. So we might do something where we start out in the mornings if we've got mixes of annual rye, go with that when the wind's lighter, and then change to go to some of the heavier seed mixes as the wind starts getting up. Of course, the calibration, I think that's been hit upon quite a bit, and since this talk is dealing with professional aerial applicators and that kind of thing, y'all understand the calibration stuff. It's not quite like talking when you're talking with the growers, but I guess my point of talking about the calibration is if you're speaking to potential customers or customers, they might not understand how the calibration works, and the more information you can give them regarding that, the more comfortable they are with what you're doing. These are just a couple bullet points that over the last few years that we've tried to do, getting it in bulk instead of 25 or 50-pound bags and, on a bunch of pallets out at the airport. Jamie hit on the Streamline seed blends, and that's a big one. We've been in situations where we're trying to do 20 different blends out of one airport. It's just really not very cost effective. I realize that there's times when in order to get people to even try something, you've got to be pretty flexible with that. Again, that's going to be up to you and as an individual operator, whether, if you allow that a few more mixes the first couple years and then streamline it a little bit more once they see what blend is going to maybe work for them on their farm. And one thing that's really helped us is the Wingman hopper system. The seed tends to be a lot more dusty than fertilizer work. And just to have that on there where we're not having a guy standing on a wing getting a bunch of the dust and stuff blowing in his face. It obviously works with a guy on there, but that's one of the improvements that we tried to make is using the Wingman for loading. Same thing, this is our loader truck. You can see that it has a flexible sock there. What we did is change that this last year to the rigid sock with the automatic or the hydraulic lowering and lowering the sock up and down, and also closing a flapper up there. Help things keep a lot more clean. We were able to use different height aircraft. If you're using a 402 and an 802, you're still able to get the sock adjusted to the height you need. You don't have a bunch of seed blowing all over when you're loading. No dust again for the guy that's on the wing. And then the flapper really helped so that we didn't get any dribbling out on the tarmac or the runway area. Here's another example. I think we saw in Jamie's photo they were using the telehandler with bags. We found that the regular forklift works well too, and that the optimum, if it's a lot of it, would be to have a regular auger truck coming out to the airport, and just like we do with fertilizer work. I want to just, when we talked about Streamline the seed blends, we went to basically a 5-mix system in a lot of areas. And I think we have the NRCS or SWCD offices doing the recommendations. If a grower asks us, well, what do you think I should use? We leave that up to those that know better than we do. If you're an operation that's selling the seed and you have a good background with that, there's obviously nothing wrong with you doing the recommendations. We just found that when they work with their local NRCS offices or organizations like PFI that have done a lot of research with it, then they're getting a mix that works in their particular area. This is just, again, when they talk about naming different ones, economy mix, forage mix, you have guys that, if they're wanting it for their cattle, they might choose this 100-pound cereal rye mix, and just depending on what they're needing. One thing about these mixes is we want it blended prior to getting to the airport and blended in a regular blender or a professional blend job kind of thing. We have, in one of the first years, you have it on a conveyor belt out at the airport, you're running one up and they're dumping a bag of something else on there to mix it as it goes up into the truck. I don't really recommend that. Those situations will come up, and when they do, we pretty much tell them we can't guarantee the kind of mix that you're going to get out there in the field ultimately when it's not pre-mixed before it gets there. Again, we leave a lot of the mixing up to the customers or the seed dealers, but that, again, it can be up to your operation and what works best for you. Calibrating for the different seed sizes. We ended up found that most of the times, if we're doing a cereal rye, the cereal rye comes out a lot like urea, and those kind of our settings and the calibration regarding the urea fertilizer worked real close to what we were doing for the cereal rye. You can do the time to material flow rate on the ground. It's a little bit more time consuming as far as, and then the cleanup deal. If you do that, you want to make sure that you pressurize that hopper if you're going to run it a certain amount out on the ground. When you fly it through the air, obviously you get it pressurized by your vent. So you want to make sure you pressurize that hopper if you're doing it on the ground. Otherwise, you're not going to get the correct flow. Determining the swath width based on the lightest seed in the blend. That's been important to us. If you have a mix that has an annual ryegrass and has some heavier seed in there as well, we run our swath based on the lightest seed. And typically for us, it's worked well to do about a 25 to 30% decrease in swath width from a cereal rye to an annual rye. And again, that's just what's worked for us. Want to say use the simple tools that are out there. It's really helped us. You can use this dispersal calculator from Transland on doing some calibration factoring. A lot of times we get so used to this all this high-tech stuff we're doing year in and year out, and calculating this and that. Some of the simple tools are very valuable. Again, a simple use of a density weight cup. We use this weight cup anytime we get a new seed, a new delivery of a mix of seed. We're going to use this density cup just to verify what we think in our mind it's going to weigh. And then we have scales on the truck that also help us to identify that. And that also helps us to if we're trying to do even loads, obviously using our cubic foot calculation for the hopper, but having the scales on the truck is very helpful. And then verifying that again with a simple density cup. What we've found regarding the guys that want to use the aerial is much like what Jamie said, just the timing of it, and that timing being pretty wide ranged. We try to, in our area, it seems like now they're wanting to do the corn, get the corn stuff flowing on first, then go on with the beans, and we might end up making multiple rounds to different locations if that's the case. Mindful of seeding across field boundaries. I'll have a picture of that here in just a minute regarding that. And that's one of those situations where it's very easy to forget, because if you're doing a fertilizer work, who cares if you get a little fertilizer over in the ditch or the neighbor's field. But on this, some of this seed can actually be a weed in the neighbor's field. And to keep neighbor relations where they need to be very mindful of keeping the seed inside the field borders. We have run situations where the neighbors are good with it. It's no problem. You have verification of that beforehand. They want to see it all the way across the fence, rather than leaving a buffer. As long as that's communicated ahead of time, everything seems to be fine. But make sure you know that ahead of time. And also the need heavier rates for the aerial applied seed. If you look at a lot of the seed recommendations, it has, the seeding rates on there, and it's a little asterisk with a very fine print down at the bottom that gives you the increased rate for if it's aerially applied. That could be missed very easily. And if you're getting your rate recommendation from your local seed or co-op or NRCS office, sometimes that might be missed. So just be aware, maybe read that stuff yourself too, and make sure that you know if there needs to be an increase in the seeding rate. This is a picture of a cereal rye that we flew on, and just an example of you can go out there and take a look at some of this, and you still see there's green leaves that are on the ground there, so it's just got flown on. The NRCS worked with us close on this. That guy went out there himself while we were flying it on. He was wanting to get data and keep track of how things were going along, and use that resource in your area. The growers are going to go in, and especially when they're talking about this funding that might be available in different areas, that's who they're going to be talking about when they're talking about the funding, and if they actually have some real data that they can use, say this was flown on, I went out there myself and looked at it, it was great, then it's only going to help your business. We get questions all the time. What about all the seed that's going to be caught up in the plant? Again, the NRCS office that went out there said after the first storm came through or heavy wind, most of that seed ended up on the ground. Here's another picture of a radish in rye, and I think you see there's about four radish plants in there, and that's what's saying a 4 pound per acre should have 3 plants per square foot. Just different conformation. There's some grass growing. Picture of getting a 6 to 8 inch start, like Jamie was talking about, and getting that growth. Another one there. This was the picture I was talking about with the buffer. A buffer on the end and on the sides that allowed basically to keep the neighbor relations what they needed to be. Here's a picture of a cereal rye that we did this last fall, and these are probably going to be, I didn't look this one up, this is going to be somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds to the acre. Majority of the cereal rye stuff we did was a bushel to a bushel and a half, unless it was for forage, and then you're up to 100 to 120 pounds to the acre on that. Yeah, here's one that's 80 pounds, so close to a bushel and a half on that cereal rye. And then last but not least, this is a picture of a field that was flown on by one of our pilots, Kent Blackard, and I apologize to Kent every day on these kind of things. These are the ones that you want to run from. It's very difficult to get done. Obviously, you can take a look at that and see that. But on a serious note on that, we try to work in your particular area. You might have some of these kind of jobs, and it's one of those deals where we tell them, look, it's going to be very difficult for us to do. We can do it. However, it's probably going to cost more, and there's really very little guarantee. You can't keep that in those contours and not get the seed everywhere else as well. So hopefully that answered some of those. Again, I want to make sure we have time for questions as well, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Brian. I see right away there's a question for you. Where can I get one of those Transland conversion cards?
Okay. I'm pretty sure that through Transland themselves, go online or give them a call. I'm not sure. Kent had this one, and he's had it for years. So anyway, I can do some little checking on that, and if they want to get back with me, or I can try to get some information out somehow, Sarah, if you want me to try to do that.
Great. And then Wes Sharp down in the Indianola, Iowa area made a good comment that they had the Iowa Calibration Clinic, and that a 10 vein Sprader winter rye was similar to Urea, the same swath width and similar gate openings, and then oat was 25% decrease in that width. So that kind of leads in well to what I was going to focus on, which was seed selection. And then Joe just responded that they have a couple of those Transland conversion cards around at Farm Air. If anyone wants, we have them. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure my volume is loud enough.
I was just wondering, if you can hear me, what is the wind range you should use to apply these cover crops? For example, what should be the maximum wind speed to apply the rye and other seeds, just to avoid the off-target movement of the seed?
We found that on the annual ryegrass in our area, because the fields are generally smaller, too, that you start getting above 10 miles an hour, and you're looking at quite a bit of drift with the annual. Cereal rye, we pushed to 15, but don't really even like getting to that speed a whole lot unless we know we're in a wide open area, and they're allowing us to maybe back off a little bit more as far as a buffer. So we use that 10 to 15 mile an hour range.
Great. So let's have the questions keep coming in. I'm going to go through just a set of slides on just thinking about seeds, since we're, that's really what we need to make sure we start with. And kind of at the end of the day, I mean, I think Brian and Jamie, you've seen this, where Jamie's really serving this sort of agronomist role. Brian sometimes in his pilot's business has to give recommendations to farmers, or, farmers will say, like, what seed should I plant? So just some basic agronomy 101. You all we need to know the seed that these farmers are asking you to fly on, just like when you know urea and you know dry products. So what group are these seeds from? I'm going to go through this. Do they overwinter or not? What size are they? Then obviously, I do believe the pilots predict rainfall. It seems like when Brian's going to fly on, rain's right behind him. I'm kind of teasing. But rainfall is really important, especially as we move farther west. I see some folks from Colorado on the Farminar, and so, rainfalls really are a limiting factor in that Labor Day period. We also need to be mindful of what crop protection practices or products the farmers might have put on. So not all cover crop seeds are going to tolerate, atrazine or 2,4-D. So I have one slide of some initial work that we've done on that. And then, if you're not already working with a seed company, sometimes seeds can be in short supply. Like there was a run on cereal rye the last couple of years, and so working ahead of time with a seed company to get those products is important. So 3 plant groups: grasses, legumes, and brassicas. Those are the groups the farmers are really going to be talking about, and so we'll go over those groups. And then, does the plant overwinter or not? So oats are going to winter kill in Iowa. Winter cereal rye is not. And then there's sort of 2 groups of plants, whether they're cool season or warm season. And those cool season plants that are the winter cereal grains or the winter legumes, those are going to germinate in the under 50 degree soil temperatures. So, that Labor Day and beyond time period. And the warm seasons, farmers might be asking about cowpeas, or they might be asking about sun hemp. And those are warm seasons. Those are going to germinate when soil temperatures are higher than 50 degrees. So they're going to germinate more in the summertime, which might not be the right time for like corn and soybean farmers to use those warm season cover crops. So then just here's, the idea of the calendar when farmers are asking for cover crops. And so we see here in the September time, that's when pilots are getting asked to put cover crops on into standing crops. And so you can see, those cover crops, the red September to December time period is overlapping with the cash crop. We also see, if I can get this arrow to work here, we also see some farmers trying to fly on cover crops in the 3rd week of June time period. So that side dress time, early June, before canopy closure. And I think Jamie's worked with some annual ryegrass in this time period. So you might actually be flying on cover crops there and in the Labor Day time period. That's a new kind of thing that we see farmers doing. So, just the grasses are annual ryegrass, winter cereal grains like rye, wheat, triticale, barley, the spring small grains, oats, wheat, rye, and barley. And so the difference between the winter ones and the spring ones, the winter ones are going to overwinter, the spring ones are going to winter kill, so they will die sometime in the first couple freezes. Sorghum, Sudan grass, millet, and teff, those are going to be those warm season grasses. And so we just want to be really mindful about sticking them into, for example, corn and soybeans, because it's really the wrong time of the season for them. There you can see some just different pictures of grasses. Then the legumes, the left side, red clover, hairy vetch, crimson clover, white clover, those are more our cooler season legumes. And those are mostly going to overwinter. And then the right side are our warmer season legumes. And then down at the bottom, winter pea, which is on the right-hand side, That one we need to be careful at flying on, and Jamie and Brian can add to this. Winter pea is a very big seed, and so we want to be careful trying to fly on something that has a really big seed. So cowpea, fava beans, soybeans, winter pea, those seeds are very big. Farmers might ask you to fly those on. And I think you want to be honest that research kind of says that really large seeds, like larger than BB sizes or 2 times the size of a BB, they would need a lot of moisture, a lot of rainfall to really get a good start because they need to be shoved into the ground, have good soil to seed contact. So we need to be careful in what, we're saying and having farmers do. Is everybody still hearing me? I noticed we lost some audio. Maybe that's just Andrew. I'm going to keep going. Okay, and then we've got the brassicas and the other broadleaves. And I'd say the brassicas are our biggest request. Okay, thank you. Farmers really want to fly on tillage radishes or cover crop radish. That's the picture here on the right-hand side. You're probably going to get a lot of requests for radishes. That's a pretty popular one. And that can work in certain situations. We've seen, at least in Iowa and the more northern, like farther north of Highway 80, than like what Jamie would be, is that a lower corn planting population, like down in the 25,000 range plants per acre, that's where radishes can be flown on and established successfully. Higher populations like 36,000, which would be what farmers normally are using, is just too much shade, and they can't tolerate that very much. Now, mustard, we did some research with mustard last year, and we had good luck with mustard getting going in the fall. All of these brassicas, except for maybe camelina, are probably going to winter kill. There might be some winter canolas that would overwinter, and this, of course, is in the Midwest. Buckwheat and sunflower would be a warmer season cover crop, and farmers may ask about that. And I'd say those are best in that early August time period. And honestly, I don't think they probably fit into the pilot's portfolio. So you're probably thinking, boy, there's lots of choices, and I just don't know how to keep it all straight. So one tool that you might want to learn more about is on the Midwest Cover Crops Council's website. Down here where it says Cover Crop Selector, and I'll show the next slide, you can go in and put the state that you are in and the county, and then put in different cash crops, goals that you want for cover crops, and then see how well the establishment is rated for these different cover crops. So I'm going to try to go to share my screen and do a live version of this, if it works here. And so this is hopefully, maybe it's not going to work. Let's see. I don't know if you're seeing, I'm betting you're not seeing this. Is anybody seeing the calculator on their, Brian, could you turn on your mic and tell me if you're seeing my screen? I bet you're not.
I'm just seeing the web or the.
Okay. All right. Well,
TP.
I'll just go back and I'll show. Sorry. I'll just show. So
Hey, Sarah, can you hear me?
Okay, sorry, technical difficulties. Do you hear me again? Okay, I think we're back on. So anyways, you can use this tool to make seed selections, and what it will do is the cash crop, once you put in the cash crop plant date and harvest date, then a blue screen would come down over those different green and yellow bars. And so then that will help you, indicate to the farmers whether something needs to be flown on or whether, it even has a chance at being flown on and work well. So this is, an option for helping make decisions. And there's the website to get to it, and I can show that later. And then just our final sort of work that we've been doing is we've pulled together a list of different pilots on our business directory, and I know there's lists like this in different states. So in your state, you might want to contact me, and I could help you find other states that have these lists. And so these are handed out at farm events, and it has a list of seed houses and then pilots and then custom folks who could do custom work in the spring. So that may be a way just to share more and drive business to your operation. So just last, there's two lists that I would encourage you to get on if you're serious about knowing more and asking questions. The PFI cover crops list is where farmers, at least in our organization, share a lot of information. But then the MCCC list is a list that includes farmers and researchers from across the Midwest and outside of the Midwest. We do have folks who are not just Midwest focused on that list. And there's agronomists, and some pilots are on that also. And that's really a place where people can ask questions and learn more about maybe what the new and latest things are going on about cover crops. Thanks, Mark. So let's do some questions to the other presenters. I think we've got the Transland calculator thing figured out. Has anyone experimented with blending cereal rye and urea to increase fall growth? Jamie or Brian?
Hey, Sarah, can you say?
I can hear you, and just the question is, has anyone experimented with blending cereal rye and urea to increase fall growth?
We haven't done the mixing with the fertilizer. The only time we've done that is when guys want to go out with radish only or turnips only, those really small seeds, and they only want to do 4, 5, 6, 7 pounds of the acre. If you've got a seed plate or a meter rate gate, you can do those low volumes without having to mix it with anything. But for us, it was only a couple jobs, and the rest of the stuff we were doing at higher rates. So we didn't want to take the time to put the gate and stuff in there, and we just said if you'll blend it with some fertilizer, we can get it out that way. And we've had very good results with that. When they've mixed it at the plant and mixed it like they would anything else, it's worked very well.
The only thing I'll add to that is I know on some of the grasses that do not winter kill, we have to be careful adding fertilizer to them. We can make them winter kill quicker with nitrogen and some things in there. So I know with annual ryegrass, if we've tried that and we actually can winter kill it quicker. And with cereal rye, we saw it after 2012 when there was excess nitrogen in strips. After side dressing, actually killed that. So products that don't winter kill, we have to be a little bit careful that we don't make them winter kill by adding too much nutrients to them at the wrong time.
Great. Another question, what are some techniques on gate calibration with low volume work, like 15 pounds and below? Low settings, hard to see it coming out. Do you suggest the golf ball technique or restrictor plate? Probably to you, Brian.
Yeah, that would be a case where the restrictor plates work very well for that, for sure. again, the ground testing of getting a flow rate out there and getting it close. We've been fortunate enough on a couple of those things where if we were unsure of where our gate setting might be on that, we were able to work with a grower or the seed company, whoever it might be, and actually take out a couple very, very small loads on a particular field, and where if we didn't hit the rate just right, they were okay with that, and everybody would still be happy, and then we would get us a chance to set our calibration. And then from there, we were just making notes as to where our setting was for each aircraft and getting close the best we could each time.
So go ahead and type your questions into the chat box. Jamie, any last things maybe to share with the group? You shared a great thing about coated versus uncoated products. I don't know if you want to tell folks about that we had that discussion yesterday.
Yeah, the question came in about coating like annual ryegrass because it is such a light, fluffy seed, and I mean, we're pretty much shutting down at anything over 7 mile per hour winds on spreading it. So I mean, it does make it tougher at times, but we looked at coating the seed. There's been research out there on that, and basically you've got to spread twice as much seed to get the same stand. It had to do with the coating soaking up. It took so much moisture to start that breaking down, then the seed didn't always get germinated. If it did, sometimes it germinated and killed it. So ryegrass is one of those things that with coating we're probably better off without. Crimson clover maybe too. The industry has went to a coat on it, but we've seen better success without the coating than with. So it's just one of those things we're going to have to work through as far as winds and stuff, and try to spread it without getting it on the neighbor and adjust the pattern. Like Brian talked about earlier, flying higher or lower. I know we went to flying the outside pass a lot lower, so that it doesn't have the potential to drift over on the neighbor and then get back up to the height that we're going to fly to get our pattern on the second pass and in through the field. But the coating just has not worked on some of those products.
And Joe just commented that they tried the coated crimson clover and had reduced germination. So Jamie's point about moisture, gets even more serious as we go further west, because that Labor Day time period, it's tough to know if we're going to get a heavy rain and if we're going to get rain. And we know the seed can sit there for a little bit, but if it's coated, I could see how, just that lack of moisture, the seed will just have poor germination because the coating won't break down. So that's a really important topic. So any other questions coming in? We just have a few more minutes. Anything we've missed, Brian or Andrew or Jamie, that you want to jump in on?
I had one more thing there. When you talked about radishes and thicker stands of corn, the one thing that we've seen is that, unfortunately, it's out of all of our controls, but if the farmer is going to harvest their crop late, that is not a place that we want radishes. So at that point in time, we're asking questions when we're lining up acres. Is it a full season corn? Was it a late planting date? If that's the case, I talked about timing of seeding cover crops, but the second most important thing is the harvest date of their cash crop. We have to get things like radishes and other things sunlight at some point in time. So that has been an issue more so than the thickness or the stand, is that harvest date being later than it should be.
That's a great point. So another question, just what brand and types of spreaders are people using?
So this is Brian, and we're using Transland, 10 vein Translands on ours. I know guys are using the Breckenridge and the Swath Masters as well. My opinion is they all can work very well as long as you know what you have before you ever start. Get them tested, and see what you have with them. We're using a isolayer bucket for the helicopter.
Great. So if other folks want to put in their types of spreaders that you've been using, we see that, you know, quite a few of you are flying on cover crops from the pole, and most folks are in the 1,000 to 5,000 acre range, with some over the 10,000 acre range. So one last question I think we have time for. How are you guys reloading the helicopter bucket? Auger truck or other?
So, yeah, auger truck within a I call it the bag, the dump bag that has the scale on it. So we'll auger into that the extra cell, I guess is the official term for it, and have that raised up with that auger truck, and then that way he can just sling the bucket up underneath that when he comes in. It's already weighed out, knows exactly how much we're going to get in there, and just pull the handle, dump it all in one time, and off he goes again. I've actually would love to hear from some of the guys that are out there doing this with the helicopters, and even, you know, I wanted to make a comment that the other guys that are out there doing with the airplanes as well, I would love to get some feedback from them too as to the different things that are working in their operation, because you know, I'm here talking today, but that doesn't mean by any means that you know, I know everything or this and that. I'm learning every day too, so would love to get some feedback on that.
Great. So West Sharp shared the different types of spreaders that they're using, and they all pattern different depending on the aircraft, he says. And then another question, we'll make this the last one. Brian, what kind of swaths are you using with the helicopter bucket? And if anyone else has answers to this, because you've been working with helicopters, please post them.
Oh, are you there? Okay. We're going to be doing some more testing because we've changed up some stuff in the plunger on that bucket, but we are right around 70 feet on that particular one. Again, I would hate to say that that's I think there needs to be more testing done. That's worked for us on that one, but again, just changing the inside on that plunger area on how that seat's flowing and the airflow around there. We're going to make probably some more adjustments on another calibration run. So I'm sorry, I don't really have a great answer on that one, but we were doing the same theory with the bucket as with the airplanes regarding with the difference between lighter seeds, that pretty much reduce that swath 25-30% at least, and that's depending on what the wind's doing. Another thing we found, as the wind gets up a little bit more, we were reducing our swath width as well, using the same standards for the most part as we do on fertilizer work. Or if we're shooting for 7 or 8 mile an hour wind, or let's say 10 mile an hour wind at a certain swath width, for any mile an hour over that speed, we drop at least 1 foot in our swath width. So if you're pushing to 15, even on serial rye or whatever, we're dropping 5-6 foot on our swath width. And so far, things have seemed to look okay.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank NAAA for, you know, thinking about having a pilot's webinar, and this was really great. And thanks Jamie and Scott and Brian Burst from Klinkenborg Air so much for sharing all your great practical advice. And I really look forward to the meeting that's coming up in November, or I'm sorry, in December, and maybe helicopter focused things need to be added. So thanks so much, Andrew and Brian and Jamie, and we'll go ahead and leave the chat box open for a few more minutes, and then this will be archived, and hopefully this isn't the last time we maybe do a webinar together. Thanks so much.